Cryptids, or strange and unknown creatures, are the stuff of intrigue and nightmares. Forget your place in the food chain for long, and you'll be swiftly reminded of it when you stumble upon a beast that defies current human understanding. YouTuber and narrator ZakBabyTV joins me today in reading these stories. Be sure to check out and subscribe to his channel, link in the description. Remember, you can share your stories with me at darkstories.org. I'd love to narrate stories about anything outdoors or trucker related. Be sure to stop by eeriecast.com to subscribe to and listen to all my podcasts and shows. Now, let's begin. Nature doesn't belong to us. From Love is Blue. My story takes place in 2006. I'm a little older now, but the memories are still as vivid as yesterday. I believe it was mid-November. My partner at the time, Tasha, and I were lovers of nature. It was what enabled us to get along so well. She was the only person I've ever met who could enjoy the peace of being out, away from the city, surrounded by nothing but trees, hills, and animals, without letting the many variables of our lives distract us from the natural wonder. Of course, we loved hiking. We were situated in the perfect area for it too. We were both from Estes Park. I'm sure it's a lot different now, but back then it was the most quaint, lovely town you could know, surrounded almost entirely by the beautiful forests of the Rockies. We were on a hike like any other. I remember it was the first snowfall of that winter, which is always something to cherish in northern Colorado. Tasha loved the snow too. She was adamant about us getting out to experience it, and I obliged. That day we took our regular route, a path just big enough for a bicycle or two that sloped up the foothills of the Rockies before it merged with the coyote paths that ran between the smaller mountain peaks. One thing I do recall about our hike that day was that there was a peculiar smell in the air. It was reminiscent of how the air smells right before a thunderstorm, like static and ozone. Typically, snow clouds don't bring that kind of air with them. I think it was the afternoon, because the sky was just a little dark, still bright enough to safely see where we were going. Tasha was ecstatic about the snow, and to be fair, so was I. We were about a kilometer in, and everything was going fine. Then, the next moment, I became nauseous. It was very sudden. I lost my balance too. I had to lurch over onto my knees so I didn't fall. Tasha grew concerned. As she asked what was wrong, I just sat there. The nausea wasn't really in my stomach, more so my whole body. It almost felt as if gravity intensified. I took a deep breath, and that's when I realized that static electricity smell was heavier than it was before. After a few seconds, I was able to stand back up. After I told her I was okay, she asked me if I wanted to go back home. I said no, because I felt fine once again, and I didn't want to ruin the special day for her. But I did ask her if she could smell the weird odor. She took a big whiff and then told me she couldn't. So we moved on. The snowfall intensified as we walked. The flakes still weren't cold enough to stick to the ground, but it did obscure our vision. Our range of view became more and more limited as time wore on. We were caught up in the snowfall, and each other though, so we were too busy to notice. Plus, we knew the path so well. When it became clear that we couldn't see no more than 20 feet in front of us, we didn't mind, because we knew exactly where we were. We were having an amazing time until that wave of nausea hit me again. It was less intense this iteration. I didn't topple over, and I didn't need to tell her, but I could still feel it. I worried it might be an underlying health issue, or something like that. I wasn't a young man after all. As I theorized internally as to what might be causing it, something caught Tasha's eye. She tugged at my sleeve to get my attention. Who's that? Looking up the trail, I could barely make out a human figure. They were around 6 feet tall, I'd say. They were walking very slowly in the same direction we were. It was snowing heavily at that point, but our town was full of avid hikers, so it wasn't too strange. I don't know, I responded. We looked at them for a few moments, and as we did, we began to notice they weren't moving. They were walking, sure, but they weren't going anywhere. It was as if they were walking in place. What the heck are they doing? It became clear Tasha was a little unnerved. So was I. I decided to call out to them. Hey! As soon as I did, they dissipated into the snowstorm. It was so strange. There were no clear movement indicators. It was like they themselves had turned into snowflakes. We both saw the figure vanish, and despite being confused, we were eager to get out of there as quickly as we could. Even though the air was cold and crisp with snow, I could still make out that static smell. And my nausea was strong, but consistent enough so that I could keep my balance. We didn't talk much as we made our way back down the trail. We were familiar with one another, enough so to know that we would save the rationalization for after we got home. Maybe 50 feet from where we saw the figure, something else happened. Michael? I kept walking as I heard my name. Yeah? I said, hurriedly. Tasha looked at me confused. What is it? I asked. What are you talking about? You just said Michael. We stopped momentarily and faced each other. Tasha said something along the lines of, I didn't say anything. I was about to argue that she did until, from behind us, we both heard it. Louder this time and more frantic. Michael! The voice came from up the trail, Tasha's voice. But Tasha was right in front of me. The woman up the path kept speaking. Michael, where are you? The nausea I felt grew stronger. Something was very, very wrong here. Tasha was scared too. Let's get the heck out of here. I nodded as the voice kept calling out. Then I realized I could see a figure again, just barely. It seemed to be pacing back and forth as it repeated my name. Let's go, now. Tasha began pulling me by the hand down the path. As I turned to follow her, though, I noticed something off. The geometry of it was wrong. It was making a sharp turn into a thicket of trees. Yeah, it was snowing hard, but I knew for a fact this wasn't the way we came up. I stopped dead, looking around, and confirming that this was not the path I was familiar with. Tasha turned back to face me, asking what the heck I was doing as I stood there, rooted. That's when I realized something else. Her hand was ice cold, and I don't mean the skin was cold. There wasn't any warmth whatsoever. Her grip made my hand even colder. It was like she was made of ice. As I looked at her frantically urging me to come down the path, her eyes glazed over. I don't really know how to describe it, but they weren't Tasha's eyes. They weren't pretty, they weren't full of life. It felt like making eye contact with a wax replica of her. She kept trying to pull me as the other voice kept calling my name, and I took the only course of action I saw fit. I shoved her. I shoved my partner of 3 years hard, causing her to fall backwards and roll a little down the hill. And then I took off, back up the path, to the voice calling out to me. Only a few big strides and I found her. Tasha, my Tasha. She was covered in snow, shivering a bit. She hugged me as soon as she saw me. "Where have you been? I thought I lost you." As we touched, that nausea that was nagging me seemed to shrivel away. There was still that awful smell in the air, though. I took one last look back in the direction I came, and sure as anything, I saw a figure, slowly walking up the hill. "We gotta go. Let's go." My voice cracked from my nervousness. She took that as a sign of urgency and took my hand as I led her down the hill, almost in a sprint. Her hand, though, was cold, and it warmed mine up. Soon enough, we saw city lights. Finally getting off the trail and onto cement sidewalk was the most relieving feeling. We walked home, no longer rushing. She asked me a lot of questions regarding where I went and how I got away from her. In truth, I didn't know how to respond. I never told her about the other Tasha, and I really don't know why. I was afraid she'd think I was crazy, I guess. Due to a lucrative job opportunity, we moved shortly after the event and have been situated in Denver ever since. We never did go back to that hiking trail. Even now, I still have so many unanswered questions. How could whatever it was have possibly slipped in between us? There was never a point where my eyes were off of her, and we never split up. And what was that peculiar smell? Why was I so darn sick? Maybe a very primal part of me, beyond my sense of logic, knew something was wrong. But I don't know. There is one thing I'm certain of, however. As much as humans like to pretend, nature doesn't belong to us. There are things out there that we can't understand. When I think back and remember making eye contact with that imposter, or whatever it was, I somehow know that if I chose to follow her, I wouldn't be alive to write this now. Stay safe, everyone. The Thing in Hawk Mountain, from Parkerkusk. I live in Briningsville, Pennsylvania. This story is about an experience I'll never forget. One day I had to go over with my mom to help shovel at my grandma's. Her house was right in front of a really well-known hiking mountain and falcon and hawk preserve. It's called Hawk Mountain. There was one trail that led up 7 miles to the top. It was a gorgeous mountain, but not a lot happened there besides seeing hawks. There were a lot of them after all. My grandma lived in a big townhouse right in front of the entrance to the trail. She was the usual cat lady. She had some stray cats always come from the trail to eat food she always left out for them. As it had snowed 7 inches the night before, I had to shovel a path for the cats to come up and eat. It was 6:30 when my mom drove me over to shovel. It was dark out, and the entrance of the trail was creepy as ever. The woods were always sketchy to me, but I didn't care. I mean, I was getting paid $60 to do this. I was 14 at the time, so I was always down to make money. I shoveled up a good path for the cats. At one point, I was 5 feet away from the woods. I kept shoveling when I heard some rustling in the woods. It wasn't as dark in this area, so I was able to see a bit more, even though it was 7 p.m. at that point. I just kept on working, just thinking it was a giant hawk or something. But then, I heard it. It was something that would be burned into my brain for the rest of my life. A deep growl. It wasn't the type of growl you get from a dog. It was dark and sounded like it came from something big, something demonic. I jumped up and looked around until I could see it. I could see an arm and a hand wrapped around a tree. I could not see the body just yet, but I could see its urine-colored eyes. They stood out amidst the complete darkness of the woods, through which I struggled to see. I stared at it some more, and suddenly it screamed. It was the most terrifying scream I'd ever heard. I dropped the shovel and ran into the house. I told my grandma and mom what happened, but they told me to stop screwing around, that it was time for dinner. After I ate, I went home, and I never knew what it was or what it wanted. I'll always remember the scream it made, that thundering growl too, and those eyes that stared me down. The following stories are Dogman sighting stories, read by ZakBabyTV.
How many of you love to go camping? How many of you have never been camping or refuse to go camping or simply just don't like being outside? Everybody's different when it comes to the outdoors. I've been a pretty avid camper most of my life. The first time I ever went camping, I was 8 years old in Yosemite with my mother and stepfather. We've been to the Sequoias, we've been camping down in Julian, and then later on, I spent a few years living in southern Florida. We did a camping thing there once too, but it just wasn't the same in all honesty. Which leads to tonight's story. We were camping in Florida. Even though Florida doesn't have any mountains or nothing like that, there's still plenty of woods to go around. My family and I were tent camping over at the Arcadia Peace River Campground. This is in southwestern Florida. We were going to be there for just the weekend. My parents had taken that Friday off, and we were going to stay there until Sunday morning and of course pack up and head back home. We've been there before. There's a couple other campgrounds in the area, but this is the one that my family liked the most. A lot of people bring their RVs there, but my family are more the old school tent type of campers. Some people like to do a little fishing. There's a little river out there. There's a swimming pool. There's plenty of places to go adventure off in the woods. And of course, people like to ride their dirt bikes and quads. Me and my older brother would always like to venture off in the woods. Sure, we would spend time in the pool, things of that nature, but we like to just adventure off and get lost on purpose. We never did really truly get lost, but the last time that we went camping there, we almost did. It was after lunchtime, but it was before dinner. My dad said that he was going to be grilling up some burgers and hot dogs and to be back around 6. I don't really recall what we were doing that afternoon. I know the first day that we were there, we spent most of the time in the pool. But on the second day, before dinner, I think we were just exploring the woods. My older brother was 12 at the time and I was 10, so we were both pretty young, but I had a big stick with me, so I felt confident. My brother didn't have anything. He said there's nothing to worry about, but we still explored anyways. I just remembered the deeper that we went into the woods, the thicker everything became. From the brush, the twigs, the vines, everything. It became so compact we could barely move. We were snapping things on purpose, trying to create some kind of a trail as we went inside deeper into the woods. At least that way, we could just trail our way back by seeing all the damage we had caused. I know after a while, we were pretty deep in the woods at this point. I remember asking my brother, like, hey, should we just turn around so we don't go too deep? And he just said, no, there's so much of this place that we've never even seen before from the last time we've went out camping here. So I just agreed and just followed him deeper into the woods. Eventually, though, I started feeling very wrong. I started feeling like we were in some kind of danger, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Remember, I was a kid. But still, something was off. And I think my brother noticed it too, because I noticed his posture changed as we walked deeper. The weirdest part about it was when everything became eerily silent in the woods. Usually there's rodents and things moving around and stuff like that, but I remember at one particular time that we were walking in there, the only thing I could hear was ourselves. Everything else was dead silent. And that was basically my breaking point as a 10-year-old kid because, let's just face it, we're deep in the woods, everything becomes quiet, I'm starting to get freaked out, and plus, it's hotter than Hades out there. It was so humid, we were dripping with sweat in the shade. I was done. I wanted to get back to our campsite and get something to drink. My brother didn't give me any fuss when I told him I was turning around and getting out of the woods. We started walking back in the direction from whence we came, when the noises started to pick up again, but they weren't the noises that we heard from earlier. Now the new noises that we're hearing were echoing from all around us. It sounded like something big was stepping on branches or twine, snapping them in half. I was getting completely terrified at this point because I had no idea what the heck was in those woods with us. But it wasn't just me. My brother was scared as well. He told me just to keep going and follow our tracks to get out of here. Something is in the woods with us. Usually, that's him trying to mess with me, but that day, he was completely honest, and I knew it. I heard it too. There was something, indeed, following us in the woods, but the noises were coming from all directions, echoing amongst the trees. We had no idea what direction this beast was even in, and that's what made things even more horrifying. Eventually, we heard the growl of something grunting. It wasn't anything I've ever heard before, nor my brother. We both spinned around out of complete fright, and that's when we saw it. Behind us, to the right-hand side, I'm guessing maybe 40, 50 feet away. Can't really tell. I was a 10-year-old kid. It wasn't close, but it wasn't too far off either. There was this large black dog just standing there watching us. It gripped the side of one of the bark trees, like it was curious. The weirdest thing about it was, it must have been leaning on the tree or standing upright on its back legs because it was really tall. That, and the eyes were glowing. I swear to you, his eyes were red. I cannot speak for everybody else. I cannot force anyone to believe my story, nor anybody else's for that matter. But I know one thing for certain. I encountered a Dogman. I encountered this Dogman when I was a teenager with my family camping. This happened back in the late 90s. I was only 16 at the time. I'm born and raised in Little Rock, Arkansas. If you know anything about Arkansas, then you know that they have a lot of mythologies and cryptids themselves. And unfortunately for us, Dogman is one of them. You see, wolves aren't really a main source of canine out here. There's red wolves out here and there's coyotes, but outside of that, that's it. But the only thing that is tall, black, and handsome would have to be Mike Coulter. If not, then it had to be some type of black bear or something like that. But that's not what I saw. I was camping with my family. It was a typical weekend as it usually is. People from Arkansas, they like the outdoors, and they make it known too. There's parts of Arkansas that are very rednecky and things like that where people are hunting and whatnot. It's just part of our culture. I was just hiking in the woods with my younger sister at the time. Like I said, this was in the late 90s. I was an older teenager, and she had just turned 13, so I was dealing with the whole pre-teen attitude, if you know what I mean. Those of you that have siblings and go through puberty and the whole process of teenageism, it sucks. She was the type of kid that never wanted to go outside. She didn't want to go hiking. She didn't want to go camping. She just wanted to sit on her computer all day and chit-chat with people on AOL and things like that. Realistically, it was a good thing that we went camping. It got us out of the house for some fresh air, for some new scenery, and it gave her something else to do for once. Anyways, my parents had everything set up. We had already had lunch that afternoon, and I told my sister I wanted her to walk with me and explore the area. She denied the proposal at first, but my mom insisted, so she obliged. So all of you that don't know about Arkansas, we got the Ozarks out here, we got some serious forests and landscape out here, we got some areas out here that you just don't want to go to in all honesty. But it's beautiful. nonetheless. So let's get straight to the point. We were walking on this hiking trail that was on the outskirts of the camping site. There was this wood line that was on the right-hand side that had this dark little opening. You could totally tell it was some man-made trail, and I wanted to go explore it. I remember stopping in my tracks and pointing to it to my sister and telling her, "Hey, check it out." She wasn't interested nonetheless, but either way, she went with me. She couldn't leave my side. When we first approached it, it was so narrow, there was no way we could walk side by side on this man-made little darkness. So, I went first and she followed behind. She complained about how dark it was and we're probably going to walk through some spider webs and we're going to have spiders in our hair and things like that, and I just told her to shut up. Plain and simple. You're with me, you can't leave my side, mom's rules, shut up. We kind of had a little argument, but I don't remember everything that was said. But eventually, she did shut up and she just followed me into the woods, regardless of how she felt. A part of me wished I would have listened to her, because none of this would have ever happened. As we were just carrying on the trail, getting deeper and deeper into no man's land on a trail that we had never seen before, I noticed that the temperature had dropped fairly quickly. And Arkansas gets pretty hot during the summertime, so that's telling you that something is wrong. You'd think that my spidey sense would have been alerted, but it really wasn't. Not at that exact moment, at least. However, my spidey sense completely turned on when we heard the howls. That scared the living crap out of me. I know what a coyote sounds like, and there's not too many red wolves in this area anyways, if any. It sounded really close, and that worried me for my sister more than myself. I told my sister not to worry about it, it's just some wild dogs. I told her to turn around, and we started walking back in the direction we came with her now in front. She was pretty spooked, but she was like half my size at the time, so I was basically crawling, telling her to go faster, let's get out of here. Eventually, she picked up the pace when we heard the snapping sounds from our left. A bored little walk ended up turning into a full-on speed walk. I know you might think, why weren't you guys running like bloody hell? Well, you can't. It was so thick and so narrow, and vines and twigs and branches were everywhere in your face, and you didn't want to trip on overgrown roots. So we sped walk. That was the safest and most accurate thing to do at that very moment. At least we thought so, at least. The faster we ran out, the closer this thing seemed like it was getting, as we could hear its heavy breathing getting closer and closer from behind us. I eventually screamed to run, and we said screw it, and we just ran as fast as we could. Thank God we didn't trip on anything else. If so, we would have had a different story tonight. When I was 17, me and my family were camping over at the Cherokee Lakes campground in Missouri. They had a pool, a place where you could go fishing. They had RV hookups as well as tents. It really was a pretty cool facility. They even had some picnic benches out on some of the spots. It was really nice. I remember it was summer break from school. My family wanted to just get away for a little bit. Even though we didn't live terribly far from the campgrounds, I think it was the fact that they just wanted to get towards the outdoors was the whole point. Just to do something out of the norm that they normally don't do. My family owned a small little 24-foot RV. They rarely ever used it. I swear it sat on the side of the house for at least 10 years before they decided to do anything with it as far as camping-wise. And that's when we took it over to that campsite. My family had planned to stay out there for 4 days. Thursday through Sunday, to be exact. My dad is a pretty heavy fisherman type of guy. I never really liked it too much, but when he would invite me, I would go sometimes, I remember when I was a teenager. My mom, on the other hand, she could care less. She'd rather just hang out on the lawn chair and read her book. That's basically what she did from what I could remember. I remember I was hanging out with my dad that evening. We were sitting in our lawn chairs sipping on sodas at the edge of the waterline with our fishing poles reeled out. I didn't catch anything that I could remember, nor did I want to. whenever we caught anything, it was just flipping around, and every time you tried to grab it, it'd slip out of your hands, blood spraying all over your hands and your shirt and your face. I'd rather not, but I think for the peace and quiet just to spend some quality time with my dad alone was in itself nice. My dad was rarely ever home during a regular work week, so this was special. He was rarely home for dinners, and half the time he was gone before I even woke up to go to school. So you could kind of say that camping and fishing was kind of our thing. I remember we had already eaten dinner. He wanted to fish until the stars came out. We had an early dinner. The sun was starting to set, so the sunset was gorgeous when we had had our dinner. He grabbed the poles, he grabbed the bait, and he ushered for me to help him with the ice chest, and we proceeded over to walk in the direction where the water was. Once we set everything up, we just casted our lines and sat back and relaxed. Don't really recall what time it was when I saw it. It came out of nowhere. It was already starting to get pretty dark out, and the stars were starting to peek through the sky. The moon was an early bird. The moon was showing itself before it had even gotten dark, so go figure. It was pretty silent. Even the neighbors weren't loud at this point. There's just something very relaxing about fishing. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely a relaxation thing for myself at least. I like it now, and I've been fishing off and on with my father ever since. So there we were just sipping on soda and chowing down on some potato chips. Actually, now that I think back at it, it was one of those kettle jalapeno bags. Those are our favorites. Eventually, I'm not sure how much time had passed, but I had to go to the bathroom. I told my dad I'd be right back, got out of my lawn chair, made a left-hand turn, started walking down the hill towards that pit bathroom. Oh God, how I dreaded those. They were absolutely disgusting. So I handled my business, wrapped things up in the little pit of doom, opened the door and started walking back in the direction where the lawn chairs were at the edge of the water where my dad and I were fishing. At this point, it was pretty much dark outside, but I had my phone on me and yeah, that was that. A couple of minutes had passed, and I finally reached the area where we were both sitting. But my dad was gone. The lawn chairs were in place, the poles were laying on the ground, the ice chest was still open on the right-hand side next to his side on the right, but my dad was gone. Just 2 lawn chairs and all of our equipment still there. I called out to my dad, but I got no reply. The night was quiet. I got a tingle down the back of my spine. My dad just wouldn't take off like that. I know I spent a pretty hot minute in the bathroom, but still, he wouldn't just leave me and leave all his stuff around. Did something happen to my dad? I remember thinking. I didn't freak out about it that much. I wasn't really too concerned. Spare the moment. I started walking around and just checking to see if he was just in a nearby area or something. After a couple of minutes of looking, I started walking back in the direction where we had originally set up camp for the whole fishing ordeal at the edge of the water, where all our stuff was at. And that's when I heard the sounds again. But this time, it was much louder. On the right-hand side, there was a ton of trees that were close to the water, but still far off in the distance. That's when I saw these glowing red eyes just staring directly back at me. I barely saw it at first because I wasn't really directly looking in that direction. I was just going to start gathering our things and start bringing it back to the actual campsite where my mom was at. I figured it was already dark anyway, she's probably going to be pissed. But when I saw those eyes, there was no looking away. It was almost memorizing. I've never seen red glowing eyes before on any animal that I've ever seen, in real life or on television. It didn't move a muscle. It didn't make a sound. It was making shuffling sounds in the woods, and that's what made me look in that direction after all. But once I caught eye contact with that thing, whatever it was, I couldn't look away. It was like looking into Pennywise's deadlights or something. I was completely frozen. Whatever it was, had to have been big. Judging by where the eyes were actually located amongst the trees and the brush, that thing was definitely taller than I was. I remember just grabbing the poles and just the ice chest. I left the chairs there and I just hightailed it back to the campsite where Mom was. I was kind of freaked out. I mean, I wasn't freaked out like a horror movie freaked out, but I knew something was wrong and I just wanted to get to my mom. I dropped everything off, talked to my mom about it. I was pretty much out of breath by that time. You know, she told me to calm down, tell her everything that happened, start from the beginning and things like that. And of course, I did just that. She looked at me in shock and confusion. I'm not sure if she truly honestly believed me after all, but then I was asking, where's Dad? Where's Dad? Then she started to look like she was actually starting to believe me after all. Like, here we go. Our kid's saying that they're seeing some monster in the woods with glowing eyes, but where's my husband? You know, that kind of look. Well, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. Nobody dies in this story. My dad actually came out moments later walking down the hill at a nice, normal pace, as if nothing had happened whatsoever. According to him, nothing did. He was actually concerned why I'd left the lawn chairs out by the water. I tried to explain to him that I couldn't find him and the thing that I saw in the brush. Needless to say, my dad was in the male restroom the whole time.